class then?
65 from East.
From which school?
East High School in Pueblo.
Oh, Pueblo. Yeah, no, I graduated here in Walsenburg.
You and I are big Y DNA matches.
Oh, yeah? Well, Martinez's are a bigger component of my history.
Now we can sit down.
She's the queen.
Hey, thanks everybody for coming. Gave a little spiel before Virginia, but this whole event this weekend it's just amazing. So I invited people that I love to come speak because they have a harder time telling me no. Virginia Sanchez has been so gracious with her time and her information down here. And she'll be over at the Walsenburg Community Center tomorrow and have her books for sale. Norberto will be there tomorrow. Norberto and I became friends through the store, I think.
Through the store,
Through
yes.
the store.
Her
I had a-
store,
Yeah. I had a store here in the North by Southwest, which was just my passion.
I dropped a lot of books.
Oh, we were talking about that. Loved my store. And met the best people. And it was a gathering place. It was far more than a store. It was a place of spiritual love and gathering.
It was like a mutualista.
And that means? What is,
It's a mutual aid society.
oh, yeah. Yes.
These are historical things that are very much a part of the Mexicano experience in the Southwest. And it's indigenous too.
So just love Norberto and Janet and Arthur Shortbowl, my tall Native American friend. He and Norberto and Arthur would talk, and I was like a little sponge watching this tennis match because the conversations were just fascinating. And hopefully Arthur's going to be back. Did he call you?
He called me,
Cool.
yes. Yeah, well, we'll see what we can do
Cool.
to get him back here.
So anyway, appreciate you coming, seeing what we have with the pictures. The pictures are amazing. It's more than just, there were far more than 25 founding Hispano families in North County, but we had to pick a number, and actually we have 33 that we're kind of showcasing with 39 different surnames. And we want to collect more of the stories. We only use the ones that we had pictures for, and we had pictures from 1862 through 1900, and they're so neat. So, fun thing tomorrow. Tomorrow's just a celebration. It's a reception for the photos and the families and a reunion. I'm going to have the names of all the families around, so if you want to go stand with the Valdezes or the Dolacs, I'm honorary. I'm honorary. So anyway, free food and Biscochito contest, and just please come. have the cookbooks. There's only about 50 of these left in the whole universe, and I'm really proud of them. We're going to do another one, and for those of you who care, there's a picture of my pig in the cookbook, and my pig died about 3 weeks ago, so this becomes very, very treasured. I think that's about all I have to say. Oh, one more thing. And Sylvia and Ron that I've worked with on the pictorial archive, every time I say one thing, and I don't know how you do it right, but you've got to cross yourself and look heavenward, because she said one more thing, and it means, oh Lord. So, anyway, Arvell Bird is coming. Yeah, Arvell Bird, who is another wonderful human being who just fell into my lap, is coming from, what? Yeah.
Or people talking loud.
What?
Old people talking loud.
Oh. Anyway, Arvell will be here on June 10th. He'll do a little introductory thing at the museum at 11 in the morning. He'll do a concert at the Mercantile that night. But what I'm really excited about, his passion, and he built himself as the Indian Celtic. His mother is, or grandmother is from Utah, and then his dad is Irish. I don't know that for sure. But he comes from both cultures. A lot of times he'll have beautiful regalia and have a tartan across his chest. He is a wonderful performer. He was trained as a classical musician, but he plays violin that's just absolutely incredible. More like Cajun music, I think, but he also does Native American flute and Celtic flute. So he will be doing the program on Sunday, the 11th, at Lathrop Park. His passion is about totem animals, and he's done a whole CD album about totem animals, and it's $50, but you get to meet with him. I'm limiting it to 25 people, and he has his handout, which is like a mini book. It'll be a wonderful event, so you can buy tickets from me tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Infomercials. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandy. I want to give you a heads up that I've written out my talk because I'm used to 3-hour presentations at CSU at Fort Collins during the 20 years there, and so I have to keep contained.
So I don't overextend myself and impose on your time. So I at times will be reading from the manuscript, and hopefully it keeps me contained and focused, whereby we can all get along together and understand what I'm trying to talk to you about when I refer to mi querencia, right? Before I do that and get started, I want to give some added tribute to what was said earlier about
Sandy. She's a woman of boundless energy. She's the founder of the Watoya Heritage Foundation
that sponsors this program through the Puentes sub-program. She's the founder of all of this. She's the rock of the foundation, right? The main rock. She is, and she is also self-deprecating, as I told her on text this yesterday or so, and I have to keep giving her positive, affirmative feedback so that she doesn't minimize the extent of her contributions to this town and to this county. And what is she doing?
She knows because she's
Read my shoes. Life is hard. It is harder if you're stupid. That is my message to me today, trying to be twins. That's not self-deprecating.
I'm especially grateful to Sandy's friendship and our involvement in this kind of work here in the county because of her deep interest in cultural issues. And these issues are very close to my heart. I've had a long teaching career in anthropology and in Native American and Chicana and Chicano studies. Our interests also overlap significantly in the political arena, particularly with our mutual concerns about issues of social justice. I've been kind of an academic activist, so to speak, and that's what I advocated throughout my career. Got me in lots of trouble with my colleagues because as academics and as scholars, they oftentimes hesitate to bridge the gap. They should learn about puentes, right? Between gown and town, the gown of academia and the town, right? The people who give us our salaries have taught us all that we know, and we owe the appreciation, lots of appreciation to townspeople. So it's with lots of cariño that I want to give Sandy her due recognition for all the work that she does. I appreciate your interest in this kind of material too. So I'd like to encourage you to take part in not only the events of this weekend, but the upcoming ones. There's lots of things going on that come through the Watoya Heritage Foundation, and I hope that your interest today translates into other kinds of support, like that donation box over there. Sandy is a great grant writer, but she can't do it all. Like she said, she got only something like $2,000 for this event. That money does not go very far these days, so we will appreciate your support for these efforts of the Foundation in Education and Cultural Preservation. Okay, where are we going with this talk? Well, it's a privilege to have been invited here to talk about the historical relationship between my extended family on the Pacheco and Valdez portions of my families. But as we all know, if you come from New Mexico, we're all related, right? We have to be very careful, as Yolanda del Rio, the singer who wrote that song and sang it so beautifully, La hija de nadie, right? We got to be careful who we establish our close friendships with and who become our marriage partners, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's surprising how the relationships reveal themselves after the casorio. Yes, interesting. So this topic and this region of the Southwest are very, very close to my heart. We're going to talk about partly a reference to my career in anthropology and the teaching of these histories and cultures of Native peoples and
Chicanos, who are Native peoples, right? Mm-hmm. I will explain later, this beautiful valley is the location of the birth of my mother, just down here by Valley Road, about 4 miles from here. That's a very special place. Her extended family there, who together they their agricultural lifeways that were nourished by these Oaxatoyas, beautiful setting of what's more beautiful than this, to take that view from the cemetery over at Norte Veta, right? And the Culebra Range here of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, beautiful. They nourished the lifeways of not only my family, but all of those families that came to La Plaza de los Leones back in the 1860s and 70s, over to Gardner, the Valle, and La Veta as well. We're all nourished by the waters of this county. In the presentation, I'll discuss aspects of my family history in New Mexico and in southern Colorado in order to introduce and discuss the concept of mi querencia. There's a book, by the way, I just noticed that on the internet a couple days ago, that's focused on that. I haven't read it yet, but if you want to get more into depth into this concept, it's so important to us in our regional identity.
I think you might want to check out that book. This concept refers to the complex historical relationship between people and the land. I will clarify that to speak of land as mi querencia is to make a contemporary assessment of the legacies of our family ancestors through the lens of history. History is so important in our identities. Mi querencia expresses a nuanced complex of historical consciousness, of deep-rooted feelings and appreciation for the legacy that has been left to us by our antepasados, those that came before us, right? Yeah, and who labored and suffered, but also bequeathed to us their progeny, their language and their lifeways, the values that go with a rural lifeway, persistence of subsistence, of caring for one another, and all of that. That's kind of an irony to look at what's going on around us today with all the violence and the hatred and divisions and all of that. It's so good to, I spent the last weeks preparing this talk and to think about how people related in the context of conflict too, but were able to succeed in their rural lifeways, their traditional ways, make migrations, enter new experiences, and become part of life here in this county. Having spent over half a century with my wife, Jan, she's a geographer. I have learned that I cannot begin to do anything without showing a map first. We have to locate ourselves, right? Yeah, so this is the map of the Southwest, of course, during the time of the La Colonia of Spain. Well, you see the state of New Mexico there. What is so important is the Camino Real that came from Santa Fe all the way down to Mexico City. The Spanish, of course, had limited commerce I mean, as far as it concerned the populations in the villages of northern New Mexico, limited commerce to traffic on the Camino Real. They did not permit any kind of commerce with anybody else. This is the nature of empire, right? Try to create monopolies. So this is the land that we're talking about. And in New Mexico, is there a, on the side, is there a pointer on here?
Virginia, do you know how to use the pointer?
Was there a pointer? Oh, that red thing?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, this is Taos right here. We're talking about this area of the pueblos, the northern pueblos. Okay, there's Taos. Right up just above that, about 7 miles, is Arroyo Hondo and Arroyo Seco. This is where my great-great-grandparents' families were situated when they made that big decision to head north into southern Colorado in around the late 1860s. Yeah. Okay, so now we're situated. The villages where people were living so isolated and marginalized within the Spanish Empire, of course, had to make decisions about all of the things that were happening around them, with changes globally that affected village life in northern New Mexico, where you know there's this concept of the campesino who has got their eyes on the surcos in their cornfields and not paying attention to what's happening around. Well, the story of my family and many of those families that you see their pictures over here in the community center, they had the same experience coming out of New Mexico. And so they had to make decisions about their lives for the security of their families, and entered into different kinds of economic activities, including migrations like that to Huérfano County, to the Valle and elsewhere, that helped them to carry out their interests. Let's begin our discussion then with first talking about the Pacheco family in the beginning, right? Let's be a little bit biblical here, right? The historical research that Jan and I have engaged in over the past decades indicates that our Pacheco ancestors and their presence in the lands of current New Mexico on the male side go back to the early years of La Entrada, the grand entry, right, of the Españoles into northern New Mexico, 1598, with the Juan de Oñate expedition. This was the initial colonizing effort of Españoles in northern New Mexico.
In the late 16th century. Of course, our family ancestry on the female side, we know that we're gran mestizaje, the combination of Espanol and indigenous. On the female side, where we get most of our indigenous component of our DNA, goes back thousands of years with our Native American heritage. In New Mexico, colonization involved many impositions of non-native populations in order to control the people and to forcibly reorient their lifeways toward benefiting the colonizing project. There was harsh treatment of the native peoples, right from the beginning, forcing them to change their ways. They were incorporated into communities by hook or by crook, which resulted in the uprising, it was a revolutionary situation. The federal Indians organized themselves secretly, and then in 1680 they expelled all of the new settlers that had come into their lands. They killed hundreds of people, and led to a grand exile of lots of settlers and the Spanish authorities in Santa Fe, Santa Cruz, and they headed south. And they pulled up in El Paso del Norte, which is current El Paso, Texas. Harsh treatment of native peoples continued, of course, and among these exiles that fled to El Paso were our relatives. Records indicate that our family of Pacheco ancestors, Juan Pacheco, was among those escapees who fled to El Paso in 1680. 13 years later, they were determined to continue the colonization of these northern lands, these marginal lands, also in the interest of protecting their empire. So our family was listed on the registers in El Paso, Texas, where the exiles had gone to come back into northern New Mexico. And so by 1693, Juan Pacheco, and this is my great grandfather, then are listed in this area of northern New Mexico, and where you settled. Let's see. The next slide for that. Yeah. Okay, these are kind of the lands that they came to. This is around the Abiquiu area. This, of course, is an area that is arid, so it automatically implies some stress in people being able to make a living there. There is also documentary evidence that our
ancestors entered northern New Mexico for the first time during this renewed colonizing effort between 1682 and 1693. I'm sorry, between 1692 and subsequently in this northern region. Luis Ignacio Valdez led his family and others to these assigned lands that they were given in the Abiquiu area, just south of Abiquiu and the Chama Valley. Later in 1739, this man led another group of vecinos, who were the fellow settlers on that land, to successfully petition for a sizable land grant immediately north of Abiquiu. This is also along the Chama River. It was on the north side of the Chama River. They successfully petitioned for that land grant, and they established in the Fondo Legal, which is the acreage for setting up a community, the so-called plaza, like Plaza de los Leones, right? They call that La Plaza Colorada, right? And so that took the name, the whole land grant, which was several hundred acres, took the name of La Colorada. As economic conditions changed, later generations moved on to new lands further north, where my father was born in La Petaca. Petaca, New Mexico is almost directly west of Taos, up in the mountains, which is now the Carson National Forest. This is where his parents, Florencio and Maria de la Luz Torres Valdez, set up their family household. The 1900 census shows that my father's family was living in a small village in Los Pinos near Antonito here in the valley. People just like those, those 25 families that Sandy has documented here in this demonstration, these were all experiencing very similar situations, looking for new opportunities by entering new lands. Many settler villages were established in this manner during the Colonia. Spanish royalty in Spain were very persistent in their constant efforts to populate the northern periphery of New Spain. These villages were vital to the interests of the Spanish authorities in New Spain. They not only demanded the resources of the villages, but they oftentimes did not give them the kinds of resources that were desperately needed to protect themselves from Native American attacks who were defending their own resources that were being utilized by the new entries onto their lands. So the people who they assigned as colonist settlers in the north were placed in very dangerous and conflicted conditions. Their intrusion onto native lands perpetrated, I should say, frequent attacks, particularly by nomadic tribes like the Navajo, the Apache, the Ute, Comanche, who not only were protecting their resources, but they also reaped additional advantages by now having settlers on the land who were producing food. Native nomadic tribes typically hunted and gathered because it's an arid region. They didn't get involved in agriculture as the Pueblos did, so they saw the settlers who were outsiders coming into their lands as a target where they could get livestock, they could get horses, they could get stored foods, etc. And they could also get captives, women and children in particular. So this is where the phenomenon that was referred to earlier about enslavement of native peoples comes in, the Genízaros. I'll talk about that in a moment. The role that settlers played as frontline actors in this very marginal peripheral area of the Spanish Empire protected the interests of the Spanish crown. This was a very significant aspect of imperialism. They can be seen as the point of the spear of conquest and colonization. That's kind of a harsh characterization of this population, but that's in actuality the bigger picture in which they operated as they were cultivando sus maicitos and all of that, right? While they were cultivating their chilies and their tomatoes and their corn, etc. They were also playing this much bigger role. This comes to the topic of the Genízaro. Are you familiar with that term? Some of you
have, well, see the reference to the book that Virginia gave to the book Genízaro Nation, right? Please read that book so that you understand what a lot of our heritage is. This is a population that is the direct result of conquest and colonization. These are detribalized Indians who were raided from their community, their Indian communities, and then traded among the Indians themselves, with the settler population, with the missions, with the military, etc. They were a very useful new ethnicity, actually, a new ethnicity of detribalized Indians that played an important part in that early colonial period. That term, Genízaro, comes from a Turkish word that later was translated into Janissary. It referred to the Ottoman Empire of the 14th century, where marginalized Turkish people were captured and put into a class of military. They became elite militaries
that helped to defend the interests of the Ottoman Empire. So they functioned all over Europe, wherever that the Arabic cultural phenomenon was spread, including Spain. The counterpart of the Janissary is the Genízaro of New Mexico, which was comprised, as I said, of detribalized Indians who had been raided and traded from their tribes. They were enslaved. That's a proper word to be used here. It's not, it didn't only happen to black people in all these different institutions of colonial society. Genízaros and other settlers were armed by the Spanish authorities, oftentimes, more often than not, inadequately to defend themselves, despite the role that they played in defending the boundaries of northern New Spain. The numbers of Genízaros within the colonizing project of New Mexico were significant. It's estimated that by the beginning of the 19th century, about 1/3 of the entire population of New Mexico was Genízaro. That implies a lot of internecine warfare, not only between and among different groups, and the Comanche were pretty strong, but also between the colonizing populations of New Mexico and native groups. The Utes and the Navajo and the Apache particularly are relevant to the history of the people who come from that region. So these, the missions, of course, were part of the picture of the detribalization of Indians. They were forced to give up their so-called pagan rites, rituals, and they were forced to become Christians, and then they were forced to work in the fields of the missionaries in order to support all the interests and activities of that institution. Let's take a closer look at the village lifeways of people at this time. You see that word up there, manito. Those of us who come from New Mexico feeling that sense of connectedness, right, to the peoples from northern New Mexico, southern Colorado. It doesn't matter if you're living in Lakewood or in Lamar or Denver or wherever. You're a manito, and people know that term, right? And she's smiling over here. She knows exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. This region, of course, as I've said, is semi-arid, with few major rivers running through it. It's more likely to find intermittent streams that flow only seasonally, yet native peoples had engaged in rudimentary forms of agriculture for thousands of years. They made very intelligent adaptations to the terrain of the land and the meager resources that existed there. The Spanish found out very quickly that the resources were meager, but yet that's the nature of empire. They're not always real rational, especially when they have a captive labor force. Sedentary native people such as the Pueblos created extensive irrigation canals and trincheras to maximize on the occasional availability of water. New Mexico settlers arrived already prepared because of the knowledge that the Españoles brought from Spain, right? Yeah, the Moors had occupied Spain for almost 8 centuries. They had a lot of engineering knowledge that they brought to Spain, and they were able to develop these fantastic irrigation systems to feed both rural and growing urban centers. In fact, the Spanish word for irrigation ditch is what? Acequia. Acequia, right? Yeah, the acequia is, the word acequia comes from the Arabic. Acequia. It's very similar to what it is in Spanish, which means one which bears water. Acequias, as I said, were the lifeblood of the community in an otherwise harsh, dry terrain. So how did people survive in these kinds of environments? micro as well as the general semi-desert region of northern New Mexico. They had a form of land tenure which was called the ejido. The ejido is a large grant of communally owned land which consisted of cultivated land, family gardens and orchards, pasture lands, uncultivated lands, and the fundo legal, which is the town site where they set up the plaza, right, where the domiciles, the housing was set up, and they had to kind of set it up so that they could protect themselves against the hostilities that they were experiencing.
The mountain areas, the heavily wooded areas, were common lands. These were reserved for common use by everybody. It was usufruct property. That's a legal term that means land in possession, not in fee simple as we have under
Capitalist system. Fee simple means private property owned, right? It can be alienated from the person. You can sell it. You can put it up as what's the term? Collateral, yes. So there are different uses under a fee simple system. With communal land under possessorship with usufruct rights, it means that the campesinos were required to make the land produce. They could not leave land life fallow more than 2 years, otherwise it would be confiscated from them. It's not private property, confiscated from and reassigned to somebody else who had the capacity to make the land produce. This is the interest of maintaining the community so that it had strength, it had resources, and also ultimately benefited the imperial project. The lifeways of campesinos in northern New Mexico were typically community-based and consisted of subsistence agriculture and stock raising and a barter economy. Goods that were produced by the household, whether grown or hunted or crafted, were traded for other goods and services. Men had to plant and harvest, contribute communal labor to dig and clean the irrigation ditches, participate in mutual aid activities, lend services in the ritual life of community members. The women, of course, as they are today, they are multitaskers, do a little bit of it or a lot of everything. They tended family gardens. Sometimes they were involved in plowing as well. They had major responsibilities for rearing children, tending animals for future food sources. They preserved foods in sótanos, the root cellars, among many, many other tasks that women performed. Older children tended to be kind of like mini mothers, also taking care of children. Families were large, etc. So older children, like my sister Ruth, she always reminds us how much work she did in our family because she was the oldest and was kind of like a mother to the rest of us, because our mother was at times was part-time domestic worker. At other times she was taking care of 10 of us. And all the little penquitos of the neighborhood, the little lost sheep of the neighbors who would always end up at our house because we had a big pot of beans with a little pork in it and all of that. And my mother was very kind-hearted and couldn't leave them alone. Let's see. Okay, so having communal land like this from land grants resulted in communal social organization. This is an adaptation that was specific to this area. We see it among indigenous groups in different parts of the world, actually. But communal labor was a big part of this. People had obligations to the community. It wasn't just, I'll take care of my garden and feed my family. It was also taking care of the interests of the community. The penitente religion was a significant force of organization, not only in a religious ritual sense, but in an economic, political, etc. sense also. A lot of the resistance movements of New Mexicans, the villagers who had lost their lands to intruders coming into northern New Mexico after 1848, organized themselves through their moradas, the churches where they met organize those vigilante groups to protect the lands that were being stolen from them. They would organize raids onto the new owners' lands, burn their haystacks, cut their fences, steal their cattle, or run them off anyway, in order to harass them, get them to move away so that they could reclaim their lands and their lifeways. Mutual aid societies, there's still the SPU DTM building in Antonito, right? My grandparents and some of the Romero family used to go from right here in Walsenburg, the mutual camp where my grandparents set up their home site. They used to ride on horseback to across the mountain into the valley to attend SPM DTU meetings in Antonito. I'd like to provide some information. Now, this is going to be kind of sketchy. I want to give you a little warning. So those of you that are have a mind that likes to see things happen chronologically, I'll be jumping around a little bit. Might confuse you a little bit. But I want to give kind of a sketchy picture of my great-great-grandfather and grandmother, Juana Espinosa, and Juan Jose Ignacio Pacheco. Okay. The adaptations that I've been talking about that were successful, that allowed ways of living here in the Southwest for thousands of years, were very adaptive. And they resulted in the perpetuation of a way of life tied to that environment. And so over the centuries, a couple centuries, outsiders who would see those lifeways would see them as kind of static, that they were stuck in their religious ways. They had ideas that seemed to be fatalistic, meaning living kind of a mentality that que será, será, right? And what will be, like the song goes. That they were not interested in social change. Well, that kind of stereotype kind of obfuscates, it kind of confuses the historical context in which they were operating, in which they were a very marginalized population having to focus on their survival. And these adaptations proved to be good and positive in their lives. They were able to have their large families and feed them and do other things with a lot of difficulty, of course. My great-great-grandfather Ignacio Pacheco's birth records place him and his family in the Taos, New Mexico area in the second decade of the 1800s. He was born in the last years of Mexico's war for independence, right around 1817 to 1820. Mexico's independence happened in 1821. At birth, he and his family were Spanish citizens. That was Spanish, part of the Spanish Empire, right? But with Mexico's successful war for independence, successfully in 1821, his family suddenly found themselves having to pledge allegiance to the new Republic of Mexico. So now they're Mexicans, right? Well, they were Mexicans for 27 years because in 1846, the U.S. had a war with Mexico to fulfill its expansionist desires to build all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. Okay, those 27 years between 1821 and 1848 were fraught with political chaos, both in the new Republic of Mexico, but also on the frontiers in the extreme north. Those expansionist goals resulted in the invasion of Mexico, as I said, 1846, the loss of over 50% of Mexico's lands, all of its northern provinces. My great-great-grandparents and about 100,000 other people living lives like they did, or in the cities that had grown up. Living in the ceded territories were given the option of maintaining their Mexican citizenship, which they had only enjoyed for 27 years, and moving south across the new border, the new international border after that war, or continuing to live as they had previously lived. They were now Americans, however, if they decided to stay. The writing was on the wall. My great-great-grandfather Ignacio Pacheco, within only 30 years of his life, had been a citizen of 3 different nations. Confusion about identity, maybe? We see that kind of confusion today among our youth. So he and his family had not migrated across any borders. They had not waded across any rivers, nor had they risked their lives hiking across hot deserts to reach the United States of America. The border and the U.S. had come to them. But yet, because of the dynamics, the social dynamics happening in the Southwest with new populations entering into the area after 1848, they were treated as if they were foreigners in their own land. There's the title of the book. Yeah, read that for me. And it says something about the treatment of people. It says something about the detrimental impact on the psychology of people who are targeted with that kind of attitude. Their world was rapidly changing around my family and other people like those that you see here at the community center today. And it seems that the increasing commerce and availability of land to the north may have some attraction to their attention. So this is my great-great-grandfather Ignacio Pacheco. This is my great-great-grandfather Benito Cruz. Benito Cruz, that's his daughter, Telesfora Pacheco, right there. This is his grandson, Armenio Pacheco, and these are their 2 oldest children. My grandparents, that lady there, this guy here, and this guy, these 2 are marriage partners. This is my grandmother, Telesfora, and Armenio. Okay. This is Armenio around 1940 when he was a very successful sheep herder here in this area. He was up on Silver Mountain tending to his sheep in a very bad rainstorm and was struck by lightning, 1944. And he was killed there. Large families are very important and adaptive, despite the fact that it was more mouths to feed, but they needed the labor, right? So when Jose Ignacio came to Colorado around the late 1860s, they settled here in what is called Mutual, west of Walsenburg, about 2 miles out of town. It's a mutual labor camp is what it was, but that wasn't a coal camp at that time when Ignacio and his wife, my grandmother, settled there. Let's see, let me skip ahead here. So it was my grandmother, Juana Espinosa, and Jose Ignacio Pacheco, who migrated to this area just west of Plaza de los Leones, 1860s. It was likely that they had made contacts with other people who had come to settle this area of Huérfano County. There was a man by the name of Esquivel, his last name was Esquivel, who was partnered with Miguel Antonio León in Arroyo Seco, north of Taos, who settled Plaza de los Leones. So my great-great-grandparents probably had connections with the people who were part of that group that came north, and this is how 10 years later, after the Plaza de los Leones was settled, my grandparents decided to make that move as well. They made a temporary stay in Antonito before ending their migration route here in Huérfano County along the Cucharas River, just west of what is now Walsenburg. The historic connection between lifeways in northern New Mexico and that of my great-grandparents built here in Huerfano County is what helps to define this notion of mi querencia, an aspect of regional identity that our families share. Those of you who are familiar with the land and the people living between La Veta and Walsenburg will recognize the ranches of the Maldonado families, Fred and Stella Martinez and Pete and Randy and Carol. All their homes are right there they were in the Chorro right there along the Cucharas River. Those were the lands where my Pacheco grandparents initially settled. They built this home where they lived. It's called La Casa Larga because they started out with a small house, right? But with each the growth of their children, marriages, children, the families growing, they would use one of the walls of the house to save on materials, build 3 walls, and there they got another bedroom or another kitchen, etc. So it's called the longhouse, right? The longhouse. And so this was extended more and more and more. Jan and I took this picture probably 25 years ago or so. And at that time it was, part of it was being used to store hay at Pete's Ranch. That's where this building was. It's no longer there. It was knocked down some years ago. Ignacio and Juana Pacheco, my great-great-grandparents, were deceased by the early 1900s, and one of their sons, Francisco, took up the responsibilities of the family patriarch. Contrary to the stereotype of New Mexican families frozen in time, lacking initiative, and living under a que sera cloud of fatalism, the family began to expand their land holdings and their flocks of sheep. Their spirit of entrepreneurship, this goes very counter to the idea of the passive campesino, and business acumen were remarkable, given that their previous lifeways were very different in New Mexico, and also there were what Virginia referred to earlier, the language barrier. And that was important that they learned to navigate the new system as Spanish speakers. They purchased another ranch a few miles upstream on the Cucharas River, just east of Valley Road, and near a village settlement that came to be known as Norte Veta. The ranching style that they created resembled that from which they came in New Mexico. The main difference in their new lifestyle was that they were now operating within the U.S. capitalist economy, based on fee simple ownership of private property, and in which money replaced barter and communalism in the exchange of goods, the production of goods of goods and services. As Francisco began to age, 2 of his sons, this is my grandfather Armenio and his brother Abraham, they entered into a partnership and became the principal operators of the rapidly expanding sheep industry business, and they followed previous agricultural practices that they had learned from their grandparents and parents. In the meantime, my grandfather Armenio had married Telesfora Cruz, whose family had settled at La Laguna. That's a little community just east of East Spanish Peak. They acquired the home site and adjoining acreage in Norte Veta from Armenio's father, and they nurtured a family of 12 who grew to adulthood. This is my mother's family, 10 of the 11, the sons and daughters of Armenio and Telesfora. This is my mother right there. These are strong women, let me tell you. I knew the discipline of my mother. Yeah. As mother's brothers in Indian traditions, mother's brothers are like fathers to the children of their sister, right? So that was the role that this guy played. This is Clary Pacheco, right? Clodovio Pacheco was his name. He recognized that my father was a very harsh man. He was meaner than a barrel of rattlesnakes. And we suffered a lot of abuse from that man. But this guy took care of us. And he, I don't know, I imagine on the sly, he would have chats with my dad to try to settle him down. My dad was not abusive because of the vicios that he warned us about. He was a very well, his personality, I guess, is the psychology of his own abuse by his father resulted in some of what later happened to us. But when it comes to mother's brother, Uncle Claudio was a very special man within our family. He would take us in his truck because we never had a vehicle while I was living at home. We never had a car. He would take us to the annual 4th of July picnics up at San Isabel Lake. So we had a special relationship. He was a padrino for our communion and for our other sacraments of the Catholic Church. So it's amazing that the sons of my great-grandfather, Francisco, this is Armenio and Abran, that they were able to acquire the properties that they did. They, by the time they were grown men, they learned to speak English, of course, and so they were able to acquire close to 500 acres near the family ranch along the Cuchara River. They acquired another 1,000 acres of grazing land on the eastern slope of Silver Mountain. This is north of and they acquired about 1,500 acres north of the current Navajo Estates development, the housing development out there. So down below, as you drop down onto that river valley, that's where the ranch house for that piece of property was. I want to mention a sidelight about what happened in that location. This is one of the place where some of my most memorable memories of the ranching lifestyle occurred. How I came to learn about all the folklore, the stories of La Llorona and the Nahuales and the Tecolotes and all of that stuff that we used to scare our children, right? They were used to scare us, and that's a method of social control. Yeah. So the best time of the year was at sheep shearing time during the spring. We would bring the sheep down from Silver Mountain and take them to the ranch there off the Chavez Ravine. Sheep shearing of hundreds of animals was a collective effort that included many of the families of my mother's siblings. This was a time when we all worked hard, herding sheep, clipping ears with a family brand, castrating rams, wrestling critters to the ground for shearing, bundling the wool bales, jumping into those big 8-foot sacks to pound the sheep wool down, falling for little tricks like my older cousin told me. I really loved his hair. It was really wavy and what all. I always admired that. And I asked him one day, how'd you get that beautiful hair? And he said, well, during the springtime, when it's sheep shearing time, you got to get in those bags and work hard to trample them down so it's nice and packed and firm so the bag's way heavier. But pick out the greasiest wool in the bag and get a bundle of that and rub your hair like that. Well, it worked. Look. Smart man. But that's the nature of folklore. Sometimes truth, sometimes not so true. Meal times were especially wonderful, with the many good cooks in my mother's family preparing various vegetable combinations, beef and mutton, topped off with pies and puddings made from all that homegrown produce. There were sumptuous meals followed by children gathering around in the evening when we would roast the colitas, right, of the sheep in the outdoor fires, and strip that burnt wool off there, and there wasn't a bit of meat on those bones, but they sure tasted good. Here was where I learned about La Llorona roaming along the river in search of children, the scary ventures of Nahuales. Those are people who had the capacity to transform themselves into animals. The tale of my grandparents' haunted house at La Hacha with the sounds of tin buckets rolling down the stairway that led my grandmother to demand that my grandfather build a new home because of all the racket in the night from those spirits. Those were wonderful times when families gathered to work to reconnect and reminisce about family experiences. That's the essence of what I'm talking about with this concept of mi querencia, family and connections. They reveal the intimacy of people in complex interrelationships with each other and with the land, reproducing past cultural practices and creating new ones. This is the cultural context in which, over time, we develop the deep sense of human environmental interaction that we call mi querencia. It encompasses the beautiful views of these Oaxaca mountains, the productivity of the Cuchara River Valley, the sheep pastures that we worked out here north of Highway 160, the memories of family experiences, the visitations to the final resting places of my ancestors at Norteveta Cemetery. Mi querencia is the center of my universe, where my own family has returned after 50 years away in the labor market to experience tranquility and peace in this valley in a very conflicted world. Mi querencia is where my family and I have chosen to live out our retirement years. It is home. Despite having lived and worked and developed close friendships in 6 different states where we have lived over these past years, our perception of home has always been right here in this county. Damn, what's with me? And in this valley, this is what mi querencia is, you know. God damn it, I feel it. I feel like a preacher here saying what I'm saying. Yeah, it's the ombligo of my universe, I like to say, right? It's the placenta that feeds us. It's a metaphysical thing. It's not something material. And the land itself, it's not a material thing anymore for us because it's gone into other people's hands. All we have left from my grandparents and what they accomplished here are mineral rights on the estates north of 160. And we pay $5 a year so it's not much, but it's something. And this is home.
When you're all in, I used to go to, there was a church in Norteveta,
Uh-huh.
and they used to go in a schoolhouse, and they used to go to the schoolhouse,
Yeah.
and they'd go on a mule, and they used to call it La Trambilla.
Trambilla. Could you translate that?
They used to get on this,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I don't know if you remember them talking about it,
Yeah.
but the third, Millie,
Mm-hmm.
she's my comadre.
That's my mother's younger sister. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, when I speak about big families, we organized this, about 5 or 6 of us organized this reunion in 2018. We didn't send out a single invitation. This was word of mouth. I had to try to expand this to get everybody in it. And I squished everybody, made them taller and skinnier in order to get everybody in on this picture. But look at that. There were over 300 to 400 people there. We didn't even take a count. But this is what has happened. These are only the offspring of my mother's 11 members of the family, just on one side of the family. You see the kind of spots of color? In order to organize ourselves, we gave a certain color of t-shirt to the members of my mother's family, Millie's family, Olivia's family, Katie's, Lucy, Horace, Claudia, etc. That's how we got to know each other, and then we gave little tags like I got here to remind me of who I am. Yeah. Yeah. So families, yeah, this is what querencia is about, right? Let me finish up with a very quick statement about other aspects of what mi querencia means to me. I know it's a complex concept, and each of those of us that are appreciative of that notion will have a different definition, because we all come from different experiences. Then I'll finish up with a reference to a poem that I used to use in my classes at CSU in Fort Collins. Mi querencia refers to the land, so it's a geographic concept, right? its geographical space. Who among us could not feel within her soul the beauty of this Cuchara River Valley, the majestic panorama of the Spanish Peaks and the Culebra Range, whose springs and snowmelt and rain nourish all of us? Its economic space. This land has provided sustenance for thousands of years to native peoples who roamed this land or farmed it. I once asked my mother how her family survived the years of the Depression, living here along the Cuchara River on her homestead there. She said, we didn't suffer very much, not like other people that we heard about did. She said, we had hortalizas, we had the Pacheco drainage, right? It was one of those long lot kind of things that Virginia talked about. And they had a huerta, fruit trees, etc. They grew cattle, they grew sheep. So they canned all of this stuff. Canned meat. That was the tastiest stuff that I can't buy it at Safeway like that. Yeah. Safeways, I should say. Yeah. Yeah. So all of what these ancestors have taught us, experienced with us, what we've learned from them, is also a cultural space. All those stories about Lloronas and Nahuales and all of that stuff, that's all cultural stuff. The practices in agriculture that help people to survive. It's deep knowledge about the environment and the intimate interactions that people learned about. The women were sabios. They could go out and name those plants that they could use as the herbs for healing, right? Yeah, so they were the doctors where there were no doctors with official degrees. This querencia thing is about psychological and spiritual space. I oftentimes imagine having conversations with my grandfather, who I never got to meet. What's with this? He was killed 3 years before my birth, as I said, by a lightning strike upon Silver Mountain in 1944. This was 3 years before I was born. And I imagine conversations with his wife, my grandmother Telespora, who, about her life. I would have liked to explore her life at Laguna with her parents, Benito Cruz and Narcisa Duran. I would like to have learned about hard times that she had at the ranch with after my grandfather's death, having lost almost all of the ranch and thousands of head of sheep to creditors. Recently, my cousin Bob Maldonado and I took a ride out to his land north of the Hogback behind Rio Cuchara's hotel. And we drove around to where his parents lived, his grandparents, I should say. His dad grew up there, Fred Maldonado. And we saw the location. He specifically wanted to show me the house, the foundation, and the well. It's a big structure that was made out of stones and cement in an arroyo, so that that was their source of water for the house, for the household. Yeah, those things are still there. All of these details about this family history indicate that my family's footprints are all over this region. And as I trek across these lands, I can almost feel them calling from underfoot. There are so many unasked questions whose answers would enhance my appreciation of their presence here in mi querencia. Let me finish up right now with a poem that I have used in my classes at CSU. It's a poem by one of my more favored poets who taught for 50 years at the University of New Mexico. His name is Sabino Ulibarri. Some of you may recognize that name here in Huerfano County. There's a ranch out by Gardner where the Ulibarri family lived. Okay, I'll read this because I know you can't see it from back there. It's called ¿Quién eres? ¿Quién eres? Who are you? Si olvidas de dónde vienes, sabes tú a dónde vas. If you forget from whence you came, how will you know where you're going? Si has perdido tu pasado, ¿dónde está tu porvenir? If you have lost your past, where can your future be? Si eres hombre sin historia, if you are a person without history, serás hombre sin futuro. You will be a person without a future. Si reniegas de tus padres, if you deny your parentage, ¿qué esperas de tus hijos? What can you expect from your children? Wow, that's heavy. Yeah, what can you expect from your children? That line hits me because sometimes our kids, because of the lack of that appreciation that we're talking about with mi querencia, leads them down a bad road, right? They fall off the good red road and enter into the world of drugs and misbehavior. I can hear my mother's voice saying to me long ago, dime con quién andas y yo te diré quién eres. Exactly. They told you that too, right? Tell me who you hang out with and I will tell you who you are. Yeah. Powerful. That's what this is about, right? Si no tienes parentesco, if you do not feel kinship con tu familia y tu pueblo, with your family and with your community, cuando ríes solo, when you cry, you will cry alone. Cuando lloras solo. I'm sorry, cuando ríes solo, you'll laugh alone. Cuando lloras, when you cry, you will cry alone. Un presente solitario, you'll be living a solitary existence, sin ayer y sin mañana, without a yesterday and without a tomorrow, sin parientes, sin compadres, sin amigos, sin hermanos, without your relatives, without your compadre and your comadre. Who's more important in your life than your comadre, right? Right, yeah, women like the comadre because this is where they share their woes of life, right? And they help each other out. You live without folks, without your compadre, your comadre, without your friends, without your brothers and sisters. Que solo estás en el mundo. How alone will you be in this world? Perdido en la niebla blanca, lost in a white fog. Solo con tu culpa te acuestas y tu soledad a solas. Alone will you be when you lie down to sleep in your solitude, all alone, right? This poem I would use to touch the hearts of the students that I taught after I had tried to get them to have greater appreciation and knowledge about their own families and have them write a poem at the end. A lot of them came across with really creative ideas about their family. This one, goodness.
Where could we get a copy?
I can send you a copy. Are you on computer and email and all?
I'll give you my email.
Yeah, okay. Why don't I just give you,
I have a phone.
yeah.
Oh, I can take a picture of it, sir.
Well,
That's
yeah.
fine. You can take a picture.
Yeah, Sabino is his first name, Sabino Ulibarri, 50 years in the Department of English at New Mexico, the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque.
No, Norberto,
Yes?
you can send that to me, maybe I can have some friends down at the library and they can give
Oh.
a donation.
Okay, yeah. Okay, final word. The educational work that we do within the Watoya Heritage Foundation under the very able guidance of Sandy Dolak is directly relevant to the essence of the ideas that I've proposed here today. The availability of culturally relevant historical and cultural information is vital to teaching and learning about American history. It is American history. It's not just Chicano or Native American history or Black history or women's history. It's American history. We need to learn all of it en conjunto, right? Together. It's one history. All right? To become educated about one's own history and culture is to obtain the tools for understanding one's lived reality. Importantly, that means assuming personal responsibility for and participating in that reality with intentionality. It means we need to become active, be concerned about those kids, those young people who are growing up in a world that we as now the ancianos, right? We've left them a mess. We've left them a mess. No wonder that they try to space out on the computer or by other means. It means taking important steps toward personal and community empowerment and becoming active agents as individuals in social change. Ahua. Thank you very much. I'll take questions if you have some. Yes, please.
I'm interested in just in your commentary about Chicanos as detribalized natives.
Yes. Yeah. Anything more specific?
Well, more specific,
Well, one of the, let me say something and maybe it might click in your brain for something. The term Chicano is and Chicana is very controversial because it comes out of the Chicano movement. Its origins go back to the activism of the Chicano population back in the 1930s and 1940s. The Pachuco movement was a political thing, right? It wasn't just youth doing their crap, right? They had a consciousness that was beyond the boundaries of our communities that were kind of focused internally. Chicanismo refers to a consciousness of one's roots, which lie within the gran mestizaje, the grand mixture of the Espanol and of the indigenous people of the Americas, right? Of this area for us, right? So, let's see, did that click anything for you? Do you want to follow up on that question?
Sometimes I just think that, I'm concerned that, I'm into genealogy, I'm into DNA. I know a lot about my native roots, or I have lots of stories about my native side.
Yep.
But sometimes, I just wonder about the native people themselves, and how well are they accepting of the detribalization concept?
Yeah.
Or not.
That's there's a lot of opposition to that, and unfortunately, there is a
Except that-
common perception.
I was just going to say, and I had this conversation with a Native American. He's a PhD. He teaches at Colorado College.
Yeah.
And him and I are very good friends. We met in Abiquiu. We were doing one of the ceremonies of the Geniceros. But anyway, I had this conversation with him, and from my perspective, who I consider myself very involved in the Chicano movement since the beginning, I really think, like, if they say no, if that's their idea is no, my idea is they have no choice, they have no say, and that we are native whether they like it or not. We are one family, and what we have to do is we have to reach out to them, and they have to reach out to us, and we have to realize that we are from the same family whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
I think we have to look at it from their perspective as well. That as a Spaniard or families that came out of that Spanish conquest, we stole their land. We killed their people. And there's resentment
Part
on
of
that
us
part, just
did.
like we have here.
Yeah.
Part of us did. That's part of our history. But part of us were, for example, La Reconquista de Vargas. I have a grandmother that she's native, but her husband was Spanish. So in the Pueblo Revolt, they threw him out, right?
Right.
She followed her husband to El Paso. And then with the Reconquista de Vargas, they were having a hard time finding Spanish people to come because of everybody that got killed and the whole
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
But his wife, my mom's there, my grandma's there, my sister's there. I'm the only one that's here. You know, she wanted to come. So that's part of our history too. We were like on both sides of the battle.
Yeah. As mestizos, we're neither here nor there, right?
It's hard for
So,
us sometimes.
yeah. Yeah, well, it sometimes comes down, for native peoples, it comes down oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes it comes down to an issue of resources. Because if they are accepting of other peoples who do not have their particular experience as recognized tribal peoples who have undergone a history of boarding schools, of stolen lands, of stolen resources, of quashing the religion. It wasn't till, what, 1979 that they got recognition for having their own religions. I'll give us a break, right? But it's a matter of resources for many of them, not all, as I say, that they don't want any more incursions on where they're at. It's made them encogidos, to come, a term that's come from anthropologists like Lewis, right, Oscar Lewis. Encogido means shrunken and looking inward. They're not looking outward because they're the subjects of colonialism and conquest. It's a big deal. And their memories are short. No, no, the opposite. Their memories are long. Yeah, my students that I talked with about and tried to teach them about the relevance of those activities of the intense warfare of the U.S. government against Native peoples back in 19th century. Wow, they can't believe that it's really still relevant. And I tell them, my dad was born 7 years after the massacre at Wounded Knee. My dad. His dad, he was born back in the time when this land was not part of the United States. So it's not so.
This was a Ute encampment.
Yeah, it was Ute. It was. There was also warfare between and among groups because the Arapaho, the Cheyennes, the Ute, the Comanche, the different branches of the Apache, the Navajo, all of these groups, and the Paiutes included, were part of the users of the resources of this land. And so to have more people coming in, what's his name, Head, the lieutenant that Virginia mentioned, Lafayette Head, yeah, you know, he led, in 1842, he led a contingent from New Mexico to settle in the valley. That early, they ran him out of here in a hurry. They didn't get to come back until 15, 20 years later. Yeah, but that's an important question that keeps coming up and coming up and coming up. But it comes down, I think, to the issue of resources. Our identities are firmly tied in. You're right when you say we're the same gente, right? You know, I don't know what your percentage is, but, you know, I'm half. I have no idea which half.
Some Chicanos are saying also that the mestizaje, we need to get beyond the mestizaje and call ourselves that we are indigenous.
And this is part of the Puentes project.
Anyway, it's
Yeah.
just a
Yeah.
good conversation.
Sure.
We will have, the things are still set up over the pictures, over at the, I'm cutting you short.
No, we're done.
But anyway, cutting you short, you know me. Pictures are still up over at the community center. Norberto and Virginia and our next speaker, Kate, will be over at Walsenburg Community Center tomorrow. And they aren't scheduled to speak, they're scheduled to mingle. So all the questions that you have that may be answered or unanswered, or
You
the
look
things you think
familiar.
of when you go home tonight, come tomorrow and chat with us. So thank you all for coming. Kate Perdoni's gonna be here in a minute,
Well, good to meet you.
from 11 to 3.
Sylvia?
And then if you wanna do the biscochito contest, you gotta
Your
bring
father
me 2
was who?
dozen biscochitos and show
And
up by 10
Renato?
o'clock.
No, I didn't know him.
He and Connie were very, very close.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Thank you
Here,
all
talk
for
about the
coming.
picture of your family.
Stay for Kate.
This is my mother.
Oh, yeah?
Renato, my mother, Mary Ann. This is their tribe.
We're gonna start at 2, but we'll
we
give
don't.
him time. We'll start about 2:15, so he's got time to go.
Thank you for doing this, and I'll
You're
probably
welcome.
see you tomorrow.
Okay, good, good. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Who is the artist?
Oh, goodness.
not seen
I
that.
never have found out who drew that
I would
picture.
love to hear that, 'cause
I
we-
think this
I-
came
I
out
heard
of the
this
Chicano movement. I think it's,
Really?
I don't know
I
if this
didn't-
was,
I didn't
there's a
know.
guy by the Emmanuel Martinez who's from
Oh, I
Denver.
know Emmanuel from
Do you?
Denver, but
I don't think he did this
No,
one.
I don't think this
Yeah,
is it.
so-
I'm gonna take a picture of it and ask Emmanuel.
Yeah.
But I do have a question. Did you ever hear, I mean, Querencia is a new word to me in the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We always said, es del país. Like if we met somebody in Denver and
Yeah.
we're introduced, esta es la, esta es Mrs. Yeah, es del país. Immediately we knew, we connected. Did you ever hear that? Es del país, E-L-P-A-I-S. Did you
Yeah.
ever hear that?
No,
Yeah,
no.
I don't know if that was a San Luis Valley thing, but if we introduce anybody, like we met somebody in Denver, oh, ese es Norberto, es del país. Immediately we knew that.
Yeah,
We knew, no, it wasn't paisano, it was país, P-A-I-S. Yeah, that's how I knew it.
I've heard that word, patria chica.
No, it's país.
Yeah, el país, huh?
Maybe it was just a
I'll be
San
darned.
Luis Valley
from my country.
family land, yeah, but we always said, you know, it's a país. Really, we knew that we connected with,
Yeah.
he knows where Matanzas, he knows where Chicos are, but we used to, maybe this is just a San Luis Valley thing. This is a país.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you heard
Yeah,
that.
no, I sure hadn't.
Yeah, because Querencia to me is I didn't know, last 3 or 4 years.
Oh, really?
Nick was my husband.
Yes,
Nick?
yes, yes,
Ida's
yes,
brother
yes.
So I know.
Yeah,
And I grew up
Onesimo lived to almost 100, didn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
He was close to
It was
100.
February, and his birthday, and he died in, no, he died in February.
Yeah.
And his birthday was April.
Yeah, 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 that's my grandfather's oldest brother, I think.
No, yeah, because
Onesimo was,
Get ready to go. I mean,
oh, I had him confused in the lineup.
he was a baby so much.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Armenio, let's see, mi tía Filomena was the oldest.
Oh,
Leo.
I remember
Filomena,
my
and
mother
then it
talking
was,
about her.
Sidelia, no, Sinforosa, and then Armenio,
Armenio,
and then it was Avran.
Abraham.
Avran, and then Armenio, and then
Yeah,
Nestor.
Onesimo then I think is after